Welcome to Sasquatch and Sourdough, the podcast where we embark on a journey into the depths of the unknown.
The mystery of life.
Weaving together threads of ancient scripture.
What do you mean, biblical?
Tales of high strangeness.
Tell them about the Twinkie.
Whether you're a seeker of truth.
We believe it's the heart of the house.
Or simply hungry for a good story.
What about the Twinkie?
Sasquatch and Sourdough invites you to join us on a journey of discovery, wonder, and deliciousness.
They feel your methods, your theories are
Spooky.
So grab your backpack, sharpen your senses,
Do you think I'm spooky?
and prepare to explore the sacred mysteries of our highly strange world like never before.
And that is the whole problem with aliens.
Well, welcome back to Sasquatch and Sourdough. I am your host, Christina, and today I am very excited because I have a very special guest, my new friend from Polite but Dangerous Tools. He is an Alaskan, not native, but lives in Alaska via the Appalachian Mountains somehow. And is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, cool. I'm doing a cold intro, everybody, so just you have to deal with it. But my new friend, Sam Curtis, welcome, Sam. I'm so excited to have you on.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. And you're a veteran, right? Army?
Yes, former infantry officer and intelligence officer with the United States Army.
Well, thank you so much for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we've got a good amount of veterans actually that listen to the show. So hopefully they'll tune in and send us some comments. But
Sounds good.
so the cool thing, I think I found you on Instagram because you have an awesome channel called Polite but Dangerous Tools, and you make knives.
Yes, so that was something I started when I was 13, and just slowly got introduced to people who showed me more and more. And about the time that I left intelligence work, or somewhat left intelligence work, I had the opportunity to finally open my knife shop and start doing some stuff myself. And started Polite but Dangerous Tools. We've been going for about 2 years now, and it's been an absolute blast.
That's awesome. I know nothing about knives. I actually asked my husband to get me. I wanted a knife for Christmas just to have something that's handy that I could use if I'm out in the woods and happen to need a knife, or somehow every day, but it never happened. I think I'm a little apprehensive with myself and a knife, so.
Oh, I understand. I think one of the things that we do is that I think people are drawn to our knives a little bit more, is that we try to do something that kind of fills a personality role too. So we try to make something that's going to fit your personality. So not necessarily, 100% technically perfect from the outside looking knife, where you've got all your pins lined up, in, well, I say that wrong. It sounds like I'm building something horrible now. But no, what we do is we focus a lot on the artistic side. So we make a fantastic knife at its bones. And then what we do is we try to put a primitive, more artistic dress on it. And then we typically find ways that we can incorporate art that's going to hopefully appeal in a unique way to the user. Something that's going to feel like it's a friend, a teammate, part of their story as they're using it as well. So we're very excited for the opportunity to do this, and we get so excited when we get the chance to work with people and build stuff that's unique to them. And then when we're not building something personally for someone, we're spending a lot of time trying to build unique, fun products that'll be functional, that will be very useful, handy, practical, but also provide something that's unique to the individual afterwards.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're what I think really attracted me to what you're doing with at least the Instagram portion, because that's kind of how we met, was that you have really awesome design strategy. It looks like every knife tells a story, and that's part it's seems like a really good part of your brand, and I just absolutely love that.
I appreciate you picking up on that. We're actually putting together a short video right now that covers that same thing. How we have to, how there's a challenge with each knife, with the background, the props, things like that, to tell a story that's going to appeal to somebody that wants that tool. And the background that I mentioned earlier, a former infantry officer. I'm a former intelligence officer. I spent a lot of time in the woods of Alaska. I love foraging and being outside, and I grew up on several farms. So what I'd like to do is when I build something that I think is going to be used by somebody in one of those scenarios, or even something that's just going to be carried, I try to think about what the person's going to be carrying with them as well, whether it's a gun, another tool, something like that, what books they're reading, what experiences they may have, and then uh, we kind of build these pictures and these photos and these backgrounds and props and anything like that based on each individual person that we can kind of interact with, and trying to tell a story of not just the knife itself, but who's going to be using that knife.
That's awesome. Yeah, it comes through so well in the Instagram. Like I just every time you like post something, I'm like, oh, I want that knife, and I want that journey that this knife is going to take me on. Like,
Well, I'm glad it's working. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So you're in Alaska now. I have a question. If you don't get the reference, it's okay. But every time I think about Alaska, I think about the show Northern Exposure. Do you
Mhm.
remember that show?
I've only seen a little bit of it with my father-in-law.
Oh my gosh, I was like obsessed with that show. It's just like if nobody knows, it's like a show about like total like fish out of water. Like a Jewish doctor from New York has to go to Sicily, Alaska, and like be the resident doctor there, and it's hilarious. But like every time I think about Alaska, I think of like small town like
Mhm.
weirdness. Like, is it kind of like that?
So outside of Anchorage, I would say yes. So we're building up a little bit, but we're still moving everybody pretty urban. But yes, all the communities are very unique and have their own brand of weirdness. And some of the
Right.
communities are so isolated. Uh, there are only a few cities on the road system here. So we have two roads that go north and south here in Alaska, and one of them is not very densely populated. So really, there's one road that everybody lives on that goes from uh, Homer, Alaska, all the way to the Arctic Ocean, and everybody lives in a few spread out communities along that road that's on the road system, and those people can drive, and everywhere else is isolated. You're talking about either a boat ride or a plane ride to get in,
Yeah,
and for the most part, you have people that only know each other that never interact with anybody else, and they've kind of grown into their own unique cultures. It's incredible.
that's awesome. What brought you out there?
So originally, when we joined the army, I thought that was going to be at most 20 years, and we just retire in North Carolina, or we'd travel somewhere close to there, and we'd end up in the Appalachian Mountains around North Carolina, where my wife and I are from.
Mhm.
But my father-in-law was very obsessed with Alaska. He got a book from the library one time about Alaska, and it just uh, pushed him into this almost like obsession with Alaska. But he had never been. We had the opportunity when I was trained to be an infantry officer. There's a short period where if you find somebody who's going to a base that you're interested in, you already have your base assignments, where you can ask to switch, and it has to be approved. But really, all they care about at that point is making sure that they have the right numbers of people. You haven't really done anything that's going to build up an experience or anything like that. Um, so we found somebody who had Alaska, and at that point, it's going to be a 2.5 year assignment. It's supposed to be 4 years, but a good portion was going to be dedicated to training. So you'd only be up there 2.5 years. Um, my wife and I just moved into a house that had dogs. We had two Siberian Huskies. Her father-in-law loved Alaska. We were up for, or her father loved Alaska, and we were up for an adventure. So we, with no research whatsoever, found somebody who was willing to trade with us. We jumped on it. Everybody we talked to said Alaska was great, and what we didn't know was they were talking about southern Alaska, the populated area with all the beautiful mountains, and we ended up getting northern Alaska, Fort Wainwright outside of Fairbanks, which is the northernmost big city. It's in the interior of Alaska. It's flat, nothing, and the cold temperatures and everything, -40, -50 that you hear about. We went up there and within no time at all fell in love with it and spent a good portion of our time in the military trying to get back. And then once we got back, or once we decided to get out after we had children, we took a job doing contract intelligence for the Department of Justice. They offered to move us back to Fairbanks, and then once we accepted the position, they switched it and said, let's move you to Anchorage instead. And we've been about an hour outside of Anchorage since then, 2018.
That's so cool. You guys are like total adventurers. Like that's
Not
really
anymore,
awesome.
but at
Yeah.
one point we were.
Yeah. Yeah. We kind of like, it's funny because we have a 10-year-old. And so I'm kind of like, now I'm like, all right, now you're old enough. Now we're going to start like adventuring. Like we're going to do, I really want to do like the Appalachian Trail, like stuff like that. So we kind of did it like backwards. Like now I'm like, all right, we're ready. We're out of like the toddler stages. Like, come on, we're exploring. So that's like the ultimate dream though. I think that's just so cool just to be able to be like, yeah, I have this dream. I'm going to do it.
I think at the time we came up here with a sense that nothing was going to be permanent. And I think you do that a lot with the military, especially on our side. We knew that we were going to move every 3 years or so. So we uh, lived in every corner of the country. Lived in New York, Arizona, Alaska. I lived in Germany for a while with the
Mhm.
military, and you always knew it was going to be uh, just for a short bit of time. So it was very easy to kind of jump in and just take any opportunity that came up.
That's really, really cool. So I have a couple accounts that I pulled just from like I mean, if you're familiar with the podcast, you know that we like to just kind of like poke around and see what's going on in different states and just come up with accounts for the encounter map. So I have a couple, but I wanted to see if there's anything that you know of I know you don't have like any actual like personal experience, which is totally fine. But is there like just like what's going on in your area? Anything that you would have like kind of be like, okay, this is super weird.
So there are stories around here all the time, and I mentioned this to you in our stories, but I'll reiterate here. Where I live is on a hilltop in the Matanuska Valley. Matanuska is a sit in a valley named after two major rivers here. I'm 8 miles from an abandoned nuclear deterrence base, across the inlet from an active military base, joint base with Army Air Force. I can see four mountain ranges from the house. We're about 80 miles from an active volcano that's getting ready to erupt. We have witches in the area that are around like crazy. That's very popular. Just about 10 miles from where we're at, witchcraft. And then the area around here, is filled with mushrooms. All through the falls that you have people jumping on. So you do have a lot of uh stuff in the realm around here. I've never had an experience with any of those people that I know of. Well, I've never had an experience where I could say something supernatural had happened or something odd or something that I couldn't explain. I had definitely had encounters with some of those individuals and at each of those locations. We've even had some B-roll for some UFO shows and UFO documentaries by Alaska shot from our deck, where we have but he's a filmmaker who has come up just because we have so many things around us and taking drone footage and stuff like that from our house for alien
Oh,
shows.
cool. Yeah.
Um, and we can see aircraft coming from Denali all the way to
Mhm.
Anchorage. We can see in all directions. So we've seen weird lights and things like that, but nothing with a little bit of digging that couldn't be explained. But this area is known for a lot of sightings and stuff like that of supernatural, paranormal things.
That's crazy. Um, just so if you go, so one of the websites that we kind of go to it's hang on, let me go back to it. It's basically it's NUFORC UFO sightings. So it's the National UFO Reporting Center. I like that's like kind of the one that I think I trust the most. I know a lot of people have like different feelings about reporting set like where to report, but this is the one that I trust. Um there's just so much history and accounts. It's just incredible. Like this website is just like so well managed, but like I found one from 1949, and it's Fairbanks. Um, and it's just crazy. It says enormous metallic disc in Alaskan sky, 1949. And so I'll read this. It says, I was born and raised in the territory of Alaska, and in 1949, I was a student at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. During the summer of 1949, I worked as a transit man on a survey line for the Civil Aeronautics Administration, which was beginning to develop the development of Fairbanks International Airport. On a clear day in July, in a sky void of sound or activity, there appeared an enormous metallic saucer-shaped object directly above my line of sight, but at a great distance from us. I shouted to my chainmen and pointed to the object, which was approaching rapidly until it appeared directly above us, but still at an altitude higher than an aircraft I had ever observed. Its size was enormous. I imagined it would cover several city blocks in size. It was visible for about a couple of minutes before it made a sharp right angle turn and climbed out of sight. Only one of the chainmen saw the object. The time of the sighting was about 11 o'clock in the morning. At noon, it was time for our break, and we headed back to the survey station where the sighting was discussed with others. By the end of the day, our story had reached the military at Ladd Field, and when we arrived back at the station, we were approached by an Army officer who interrogated us separately regarding the sighting. When I was asked how high it was, I responded that it was at least an altitude of 30,000 feet. The officer asked why I would choose that altitude, and I said it was because I knew of no aircraft that could reach that altitude. I'm aware that this was a very early sighting, but understand that your organization is nevertheless interested in recording all reliable sightings. And since I am now in my 80s, there is no time like the present to report it. So that's crazy. And they actually will follow up and stuff with this man. His name's Mr. Davenport. And apparently he has a website, but I haven't been able to chase him down or anything. But I just thought that was really, really crazy because it was just so much of a big object. What could that have been?
Yeah, it's definitely crazy thing about that size. I know. So I was on Ladd Army Airfield, which is part of Fort Wayne right now, and not sure what was going on with the military at that exact time that he's talking about, but in that area, so those probably those areas that he's talking about, you have two nuclear deterrence bases on either side of that, about 100 miles south, which seems crazy, but when you can see mountains hundreds of miles away, it's pretty easy to see a straight line to some of these places. So, what's now Fort Greely and what's now Clear Air Force Base, and that was that kind of triangle there between Fairbanks, Clear, and Fort Greely was always the site of weird aircraft sightings from a lot of individuals. It's also, although I've never been in them, Ladd Army Airfield is known for a lot of bunker activity and things like that, where they've got a lot of bunkers, stuff going on in bunkers all the time underneath it. And at one point, I was told that that was supposed to be uh, built so that the entirety of Fairbanks could go into those bunkers in the event that something was needed, and that was something that was uh, somewhat rehearsed.
Hmm.
And around the time that they were building bunkers, you do hear weird stories from people, when just crazy sightings and stuff like that, and a lot of weird animal sightings around the area as well.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
Like supernatural stuff, or?
So there were stories about people encountering um, more like wolf-like creatures, which there are wolves around there, so it does make sense. And animals that it's hard to say if it was just people who had never encountered them because they're coming to Alaska for the first time with the military, or if they're seeing something odd. I think most of the stories were chalked up to animals acting strangely. Uh,
Oh,
but
gotcha.
yeah, they were very, that was common in the around that area. So that's not surprising at all if somebody saw something that was around that area.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I don't. I mean, so we're in Maryland, so I don't really see a lot of strange, creatures and animals and things like that. I always kind of say I've never had an encounter with a Bigfoot or a dog man or anything. I just find it fascinating that people are seeing these things and able to like talk about them now. But I would imagine if I was like in the Alaskan wilderness, I would probably be like, "What's that? What's that?" Like, wouldn't know what to do if I saw a moose, like
It
for sure.
a lot of people think it's crazy, but we have this all the time where we have an acre here butted up against some public land, and usually we have moose here quite frequently. We don't have thick vegetation or anything like that, but I think a lot of people when they first come up here, they're surprised at how easy it is for those animals. They're so massive to hide so close to you. We've
Mm.
been surprised, on hikes and stuff like that with moose being less than 10 feet from us. And you're talking about an animal that's over 1,000 pounds that's very close to you. If it's not moving, you're not really hearing any sounds. If the vegetation is thick enough, you're not seeing it. And those encounters are normally with a moose or something like that is normally, um, seconds. So
Yeah.
it, I think just the size of some of the animals up here and how easy they are to hide. Now, I think what's interesting here is like everything, people imagine Alaska, like with all of our animals, people imagine that we have a massive amount of animals, and we do. That's spread over a massive amount of terrain. Uh, so you don't really see them as much as you would think you would. These massive animals and stuff like that. Uh, so I would think that anything strange um, would be even more hidden up here. Where you do see what I think is very odd in places like this, where you have a massive amount of terrain, is when sightings get uh, heavily reported in one area. If that makes sense. So
Yes.
that's one of the things that stands out because most of our animals around here very much spread out, and they like their own space. They like their own territory. So I think one of the things that is very different about unique animal stories up here and unique creature encounters is that once they happen in one area, they seem to happen often in one area.
Yeah, it's kind of I guess it's more of like a hot spot
Yeah, or it
if you think
pops up
about
and
it.
just doesn't seem to go away.
Yeah. Is that do you have a lot of that near where you are, or is it just that you kind of heard?
So you have some of the old timers here who has told stories about seeing wild things further south. But typically, those are stories that are hard to tell if they're actually firsthand, if they're secondhand, third hand. So you hear people move quite a bit here. A lot of the old timers have been in villages and moved around places like that. But also, you have people that just move daily. So we attend a church where, in the small Bible study that we're a part of, uh, almost everybody owns either a plane or a boat, and so it's nothing for people to pop over for a village, uh, to a village for an area for a bit of time and stuff like that. And people pick up stories quite a bit doing
Mhm.
that. I think one that's common right now is people reporting more little people sightings in Alaska.
I've heard
That's
that.
really popped up, but not so much the big stuff anymore. But it's very easy for some of these people that move all over to kind of pop into one area, take a story, move it to the other area pretty quickly, and you see a lot of the stories travel that way.
Yeah. I've heard it's probably just a collection of things like from different podcasts and stuff like that, but like I've heard that like and I know like if you listen to Blurry Creatures, like they're always talking about like the little people. Like I can't remember which one, if it's Luke or Nate, that's like the little people, because it's just such a weird, you know, encounter. But if you go back into records, there's like encyclopedias of. I have one. It's Fritz Zimmerman does a really good work with like
Hmm.
putting together all of the his like giants of North America. But in that, he has collections of like little people, like not
Hmm.
even encounters, but like bones that have been found. So, I mean, it's definitely not unheard of, but it's just interesting that that stuff is kind of like talked about more,
I think
for sure.
we I think we have a good reason. I think there's something that whether you believe they're real or not, I think there's something to the importance of monsters, and I think that it's very important in a place like Alaska where there's so many dangers. I think especially when you have smaller communities, and you hear a lot with Alaska about people going missing, people getting injured. I think the importance of monsters is very important, especially for parents. When you look at the old stories and stuff like that, a lot of the monsters that we talked about often targeted children, and they were creatures that hid under the ice, looked for cracks where children were near, and stole children and stuff like that. Um, and there were a lot of ways for children to get hurt around here. I think, I've heard people talk about the psychology of monsters up here in an area where it's so easy for children to get lost, children to get hurt. Uh, it could be a psychological defense mechanism where parents are able to say, like, yes, I didn't do anything wrong. A monster got them. There's nothing that I could do about it. And then when you have these smaller communities, it's necessary to have monsters to make sure that when those dangers do happen, that parents are able to move on and not necessarily bring uh take somebody else out of the tribe that needs to work or something like that. I think
Hmm.
whether or not uh whether you believe in monsters or not, whether you believe in little people or not, or cryptids or not, the importance of having those as part of the local lore in a place that's so dangerous is I think the importance of that can't be understated. Otherwise, you have in a place that's so dangerous, you'd have people going crazy all the time. I think if the constant thought was something happened to a child because they were a bad parent or they didn't do their job right or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I guess we probably don't think of things in those terms being so close. Like, I mean, I'm in a very urban area. I have
Mhm.
no idea what it's like to live somewhere where I might have to take a plane or a boat to get, to a neighboring area. So that's a really, I mean, that it actually makes a lot of sense to think of that in that way. Um, and there are a lot of missing people in from that have like seem to happen in Alaska and those remote areas.
Yeah, I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it could be explained if people could be found, but it's very very difficult to find people in such a remote, densely vegetated area, especially when most people travel by water. I mean,
Mhm.
when most people travel by river in between some of these locations, if something happens, there's not really a good way to find anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you're kind of like, I mean, yes, I mean search and rescue obviously, but then it's like if time with timing, it probably gets in the way too of
Hmm.
being able to get to people quickly.
We had a, I know we had an individual, and this was just the belief, kind of putting all the pieces together. People saw most of it, but when I was doing a tramadol investigation to elicit tramadol going into villages, we heard people talk to us about an individual from a village who had taken way too much tramadol. One of the things that tramadol does is and one of the reasons it's used all over the world is because it kind of cuts off that sense of fear.
Mm.
It was winter, but he had broken up a section of the river near his house, and it was winter where the ice hadn't gotten really thick yet, and people saw him go out after taking a bunch of tramadol to get water from that area. To Not sure what he was doing to it, but he falls in and he's never recovered. And the
Yeah.
river freezes over. There's nothing you can do for at least throughout winter. You can't break up every section of river and look for him. So he was, at least the last I heard, never recovered. And you have that quite a bit. Um, but that's one of those situations where I think it's easier to attribute to monsters in some ways rather than kind of face, uh, your own problems in some areas.
Sure. I wonder what do you think like if you look at kind of where we are, I guess now obviously like this is more of like a supernatural, spiritual podcast for sure. But I'm always interested in people's takes of, if we look kind of collectively, like how we all kind of look at these things and these stories, do you think that do we want to see the monsters and everything? Or do you think that there's kind of like a balance? Like, do you think something really weird is unfolding, or do you think it's just that we're getting careless sort of as a society?
Uh, I think one, the need has lessened for there to
Hmm.
be kind of what we were saying. There's less of a need. There's less interaction with places that could be ancient, old, where people in other countries would still have certain areas that they could go to that they knew had been there for hundreds of years, thousands of years in some places. We don't really have that anymore, and I think that there is whether it's some type of intellectual arrogance, whether it's just a cultural thing, whether it's a safety mechanism that's more suited to the times now. I think there's a pretty heavy desire to explain everything away with some type of science or rational thought, um, which I think is people assume is more fitting. I think if you think monsters were a survival mechanism back then, I think science is a survival mechanism now, and rational thought is a survival mechanism now. And both of those kind of give you a way to explain something you can't normally explain, and they give you a way to kind of cope with the way that life is when you can't understand certain aspects of it. So I think
Yeah.
now I don't know if people are seeing more now, if people are seeing less now, but I think we're kind of seeing a shift in some ways away from people explaining everything away with science to maybe being a little bit more open to the possibility that science can explain everything and leaning into that a little bit more. So I think there's definitely a shift, whether it's a mindset shift and people are allowing themselves more opportunities to explore the unexplained. I'm not sure, um, but I do think that's something that's going on in the background of people's thought quite a bit.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And it's interesting, like even with like cases like that man that, I just read, he was in I didn't pull up what year that was. He reported that in 2013. So it's very
Mhm.
possible that that man has passed away. And, he was in his 80s when he finally reported that. So I think we see a lot of that as well, is folks that maybe weren't comfortable. I'm in my 40s, so even in like my parents' generation, you didn't talk about obviously you didn't talk about anything paranormal or supernatural because people would think you were nuts, but you also didn't talk about like your feelings and,
Mhm.
anything like that you might have encountered otherwise, you know what I mean? So I think we're definitely seeing people a little bit more open-minded and sharing their experiences.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think there's a shift too. I know this is a Christian based podcast too, and I think one of the things I grew up hearing stories from my grandmother that and heard more stories about her yesterday. She's passed now, but heard more stories about her yesterday when I brought some of this stuff up to my mom. Some crazier stories about her, and we heard those. She was very strong in her faith. She read the Bible nonstop. She you know, knew the Bible back and forth. Her husband, my grandfather, started a church in the area. That's where everybody went to church. So uh, her life was pretty centered around the Bible and her Christian faith. And then there was these aspects of her lives and these stories that almost were put in a separate box, I guess, for a lot of us. This is what I've seen. This is who I am as a Christian. Not really reconcile one or the other. There wasn't a way for us to kind of mesh the two of those together. And I think that's one of the things too that we're seeing a big shift with is people not trying to isolate, you
Hmm.
know, what they can't explain from what they can explain. And I think it's incredible, really.
That's it's you're spot on. Like I was actually just listening to the Bub podcast earlier today when I was taking a hike, and Bo Kennedy had a guy on, and they're talking about the same exact thing. That we're kind of taking, I think, religion and spirituality kind of put everything like Jesus and the Bible in this box of, this is what faith looks like.
Hmm.
And you don't talk about all of the stuff, even though it's in the Bible. Um, and now you're seeing it kind of, there's definitely a shift. My husband and I were talking about this last night. Like there's definitely a shift happening. Um, Now I actually came to faith in 2019. So I was an unbeliever until then. And then as part of my journey, it's kind of been like, well, wait a second, I had paranormal and like weird encounters and experiences, and so are all these other people. So what do you do with that? You know, like if
Mhm.
I were church back in the day and grew up in it, I wouldn't have been able to talk about any of that stuff, you know?
Yeah, I think so. I think where you see this kind of shift too, and I think I love seeing the transformation where people are more accepting, because I think it gives us the opportunity to explore elements of the Old Testament. I think churches have typically been rooted in the New Testament and the Gospels for so long that this has given us a chance to this mindset shift has given us a chance to explore the Old Testament too, and really accept some of those supernatural things when they were talked about when I was a kid. So I grew up. I've been in church my entire life in North Carolina. I know where I grew up. I went to this church where the pastor was actually a descendant of the Hatfield McCoy fight. He was a
What?
Hatfield, and it was awesome. And he would talk about these supernatural aspects of the Old Testament that I see now. What he was doing is he would give you these deeply supernatural, deeply theological points, but it would be brushing past those really quickly to get to the point of a sermon.
Right.
And so even when those were introduced, they weren't the focus at all. And I think that's something that you're seeing a shift from, well, not from, hey, this is something supernatural, but the point of what I'm trying to say is, here's what you can actually take away from the sermon. I think you're seeing that like, hey, what do we do with this, and why did God put this in here? Why is something that I can't explain? Why is there one sense about the Nephilim? Why do we need to know how the angel of the Lord interact in this situation? What is the point of this story that seems like it's just supernatural for no reason whatsoever
Right.
thrown in there? And how is it more than, how do we look at this as more than necessarily just good talking points and, bullet points to make our life better? And I think that shift kind of, uh, I think it's incredible, but I think you're seeing the breezing by supernatural activity kind of go away, and people really wanting that deeper understanding of those supernatural pieces in there that ultimately make our faith stronger.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about so that was kind of one of the things I had to like reconcile is like, I was kind of like, all right, well, I came from total unbelief and like atheism, and then
Hmm.
went to my church. Like it's like a whole story, but like, I had to at one point be like, okay, well, I can get down with Jesus. Like I can understand you, Jesus,
Yeah,
and I accept you as my Lord and Savior. And then it was kind of like I had to be like, but really, like virgin birth, what's that about? And how does this work? And how, and I went to him about it because at my church, and I work at my church, like, my pastors were like, you got to talk to him about it. Like, we can't hold your hand. They're kind of like, obviously discipleship, small group, all that stuff, like have people around you, but it's ultimately God is going to give you that understanding in a way that you could understand.
yeah,
Um, and I think that that's like the coolest thing because you're right. We have such a supernatural, and then it just all kind of clicked. And he told me like straight out, like very clearly, I either am who I say I am or I'm not. And that's it. Like,
yeah,
so that really just kind of shattered a boundary for me, like right away. And that's when I kind of, started like not getting super religious, but like loosening up to all of this stuff where it's like,
yeah,
well, wait a second, considering that, like, eventually we're going to get to a point where we're going to see a lot more people come to faith. Well, what about those people that experience really weird stuff and they
yeah,
can't, and they don't know what to do with it, or it shatters their faith, or it makes them like not understand parts of, like you said, faith that are very supernatural. We literally, we're about to celebrate Easter, like
yeah,
the most supernatural event ever. Like,
yeah,
you know, I mean, earth shaking. Just I get so excited about Easter. It's so funny because some people I know are just like, oh man, it's so gruesome and what happened. And I'm like, what happened on the cross is so important, but it's like it's the whole experience of what happened after. Like,
Yeah.
He defeated death, and it's incredible. Like, that's the story of Easter is just wild. You can't get any more supernatural than the story of Easter.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that's been so hard for a lot of Christians is that I think we look at the story of Jesus and we start the story of Jesus with the Gospels, where Jesus is being born. And we've got the 400 years of silence. The Bible is naturally broken up, Old Testament and New Testament. And so we look at Jesus' life, I think, is almost the start of this entire story. And then the New Testament is really what we stay in. And it's the Gospels. We'll branch out into a letter if we need to. And then we bring it back to the Gospels and what Jesus said, usually in Matthew 5. And that's the basis of Christianity. I think if you break the Bible up and you look at it as sometimes I think that people would view the Bible better if they looked at if the Old Testament went through Jesus' resurrection. If the Old Testament included Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you said that
Mhm.
this is the first part, this is the story, from the fall to the resurrection, and then everything afterwards, how do we live because of that? Because when you include all of that, all those the supernatural elements, what the cross actually accomplishes, starts to make so much more sense. But only if you have the context for the fall and everything in the background as
Mhm.
well. And I think we lose. I think we water down the the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ a lot by not including that, by not having that context and not providing it as often as possible for people.
Oh yeah. And I almost wonder, I think you're right. Like, it is kind of like the water. It's just like, okay, yeah, he did that. That happened. And I'm like way back then. And it's like, wait, we're talking about a man that like conquered death and like went down and like grabbed the keys of, like, I mean, the whole story of Easter, and then
Yeah.
came back, and like it's just crazy. Like, I just have you seen that? I'm trying to find it. It's like, if you look at the Bible, I think it's like it's an arch, and
Mhm.
it connects. It's like it almost looks like a rainbow. Somebody did this awesome thing where they connected like every point
Yeah.
of interconnections of the Bible,
Hmm.
and it's like incredible. Like, from start to finish, like you can find Jesus throughout the Old Testament. Like, it's just wild.
Yeah. I think especially one of the things I wish we'd see more work on is the angel of the Lord, Michael Melchizedek. Where you have so many theologians that will come along and say, like, I think the angel of the Lord is Jesus. I think Michael is Jesus. And there's not a lot of, I feel like there hasn't been a lot of follow up in those, but to really connect those stories over time as well. But I think seeing that when you can see the Old Testament and exactly like you're saying, see that point of connection in Jesus' teaching, I
Mhm.
think it changes the way you look at the Bible.
It really does. It
Yeah.
makes it like it makes it so it's just like not it's not this like static, it's not as static as we read it. It's just such
Uh,
an arch of storytelling. It's just such incredible storytelling that God is telling us through all of the books. Like,
yeah.
we've actually been watching, and I actually put it on Instagram. I highly recommend the House of David, or Song of David, on Prime. That show is amazing, and it's all about, like, we obviously get to the point of David and Goliath, and they've taken some like creative liberties, but
Mhm.
people are really talking about this show, because they're talking about giants, and they're talking about
Yeah.
like taking this like one specific, because that's another like Sunday school lesson, right? Like, oh, David defeated the giant, and you can defeat your giants in your life, like all your little problems. And it's like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of evidence that there actually were giants. Like, and
Yeah.
that's getting crazy. Like, you know.
Yeah. And I think it changes the story too when you look at it, when you don't look at it in isolation
Mhm.
and you start looking at it. I think this is a good trend too. You start seeing that connection where when you look through the Old Testament, you get to the story of David and Goliath, and you start thinking about God's promises and bloodlines. And if you take David and Goliath by itself, the focus is on David believing God. But when you take in the context of the entire story, you see that it's promises to Abraham,
Mhm.
or God talking to Eve in the garden, promises to Abraham, promises to David, and God carrying out that entire story. I think one of the things that House of David does, uh, or is doing for a lot of people, is getting them to at least look back at some of the context that we often. And I think it's a really bad way that we as a culture handle the Bible, is that we pull stories out, and I think we're used to that, pulling a story out and seeing what we can learn from that individual story, and not what that individual story means in the context of the entire Bible.
Mhm.
And then we kind of isolate. We do that with the rest of our lives as Christians too, where we isolate things that don't line up with those out of context stories, and we don't go any further into them. I know my grandmother, same way, um, where she'd have these stories that didn't make sense to us. I grew up believing that, uh, being told and believing that ghosts, there's no explanation for ghosts. Ghosts are not real. That's people seeing things. Because the Bible doesn't give us a good context for
Mhm.
what a ghost is. Ghosts cannot be real. My grandmother swore her entire life, or my entire life, and I've heard this story from lots of people. She woke up one night. My grandfather traveled. He was a truck driver. She woke up and saw a woman that she was translucent standing over my aunt's crib, reaching into her crib. And my grandmother kept a 38 under my grandfather's pillow when he was traveling, and pulled out and just started shooting. Shot through the ghost at I think it was the mirror of the wall behind it, and shot several times. Uh, and then the figure kind of disappeared through the wall.
What?
And we got to, when you hear those in isolation, like, is grandma, if ghosts don't exist, grandma's just shooting at the walls. This is something that needs to be dealt that needs to be handled too. Uh, and if she is seeing something, well, how do you reconcile that with our faith? And I think that's something especially for a woman who so deeply believed in the gospel, who believed in the Bible and the teaching of God. How do you reconcile something that we say doesn't exist or can't exist because the Bible doesn't have a good framework for it, or
Mhm.
that we don't see a good framework for it in the Bible, with the fact that we're shooting at something at night in the house? So I
I've
think
heard
you're
so many
seeing some of that.
stories like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where like an older it's like I had a lady contact me about an encounter similar, where it's my mother is experiencing something in her room. She is older, um, and she's terrified at night, and she's a woman of faith, walking with the Lord her whole life. And my whole thing was, okay, well, let's not over supernaturalize it.
Hmm.
Eh, When is it happening? Is it happening in the evening? Might she be sundowning? Do we need to have her, evaluate? Because that happens when we get older. But outside of that, yeah, like if grandma's shooting at the wall, like,
Yeah.
that's wild.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. She sounded like a pretty cool lady.
She was she was a pretty incredible woman. She had stuff like that her whole life. She grew up in a snake handling church,
Oh, wow.
and left that, or left that with her family. And then she have encounters, or she have things like that. My mom just told me yesterday that she would have these that her mother, my grandmother, would have these vivid dreams, and she would tell
Mm,
people about them, and then they would come true. And then the local community she was in, eventually, when she would call, my mom said that she did this, and other people would do this too, where my grandma would call and say, "I had a dream about you last night," and people would say, like, "Don't tell me. I don't want. I don't want
yeah,
to know anything
right.
about it." But I think, I don't think anybody would ever say that she was a liar. I think she was,
Mhm,
everything I knew about her. She was a very honest person. She was very well regarded. Um, so nobody would say that she was lying. People would say that those things didn't exist and those things couldn't
mm.
happen, but they wouldn't reconcile, the two of them. And I think I'm glad to see that that's not the case anymore. That we can kind of bring up those things, uh, in church a little bit more, and that we're encouraged. I think a lot of churches now are encouraging people to seek out answers in the Word and kind of start digging in and seeing what they can find as well.
Yeah, because it kind of goes hand in hand. Like, I mean, for me and like for my story, exactly that. I had to kind of say, well, wait a second, what about ghosts? Like, when the disciples see Jesus, like, I think it's when he was walking on water. I think there's one account where they're like, he's like, I'm not a ghost. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus legit says, I am not a ghost. So what does that, what does that mean to them? And I think sometimes we forget that too when we're reading the Bible, that like back when it was written, what did that mean? What did a ghost mean to them? What might that have been? Just a spirit? I think sometimes it's just not as black and white. And for a while, maybe it was just a religious spirit in the church, or different churches trying to have control over that narrative of Bible and not letting people have that individual. Because at the end of the day, your walk with the Lord is your own individual walk. And he's going to, the Holy Spirit's going to guide you the way that he's going to guide you. But I think people just kind of got lost in that sort of religiousness,
Yeah, and I think that the practical people get lost in. I think you have more control the more you can explain, and I think it encourages us
Right.
to lean on our own understanding a little bit more. Like if this is unexplained, it's because I need to know more. Like I need to know about how light can refract. If to
Right.
explain something I'm seeing, I need to know a little bit more about uh, you know I remember a few years ago when the Wheeler DeWitt theory was getting big and people were trying to reconcile the theory of relativity and quantum physics and explaining, the absence of time. And that was an explanation that
Mhm.
people had for ghosts and stuff. A lot. I think it's easy to lean on your own understanding that way and to think that anything you can't explain is more of a fault with you not knowing enough. And
Right.
if you only knew a little bit more, you'd have more control over the situation. You could understand it a little bit better, and uh, you wouldn't have to worry necessarily about not being able to explain things.
Kind of reminds me of that tree, that knowledgeable tree that we weren't supposed to mess around with. Like, we're still kind of doing that. Like,
Yeah, I think I think it seems odd. Why would God not want you to have knowledge? But I think it's a crutch for a lot of people. I think one of the things you see at the burning bush too, when Moses says, "Who shall I tell them to send me?" and God says, "Tell them I am." I mean, it doesn't
mhm.
help us narrow God down anymore at all to say, "I am," when Moses has to say, "I am," has sent me. Well, that just still this question's still there. Well, who is I am? What? How do we understand I am a little bit better? And I think God expects. I think God isn't going to give us all the answers. We're not going to have all of the knowledge. And I think along the same lines of asking um, God to give us this daily bread when we pray to Him, I think we need enough understanding to still trust God and do what He's called us to do. And I don't think we need more understanding than that.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that people struggle with a lot. If I could go on a quick tangent real quick, I do think one of the things I appreciate so much about the Army and the intelligence side of it is when I was going through, I think I just had a very good instructor at the time, who was a person of faith. I remember they taught Army intelligence as this way of saying, "Hey, look, come into this knowing that you don't really know what's going on, but instead gotta understand that all possibilities when you're looking at a new area, new weather, new terrain, new people, new stories, new culture, understand that you don't know everything, and so that every single thing is a possibility. You're not in the minds of people that are going on. So no theory, no plan, no source of intelligence, no story should be off the table. Consider all of it accurate, and then when reports come in, just make a little check on a box. So line all these up and have a checklist. All right, here are all the theories I have at the top of this list. Here's everything that could possibly happen. Here's everything that people have told me is happening. And then here are reports that we get in. And I'm just going to check a box if it could line up, if that report could line up with any of those. But you'd never rule out a possibility. And he was very emphatic that that's what we did. And I love that mindset that you kind of you're never surprised by anything because you never ruled out anything as an option. And he would later say, and I've said this a lot, and I absolutely love it. We were dealing with and training some reports from people who mentioned something supernatural. So they were telling us about it was us looking at reports that had historically come in, trying to figure out how to piece these together, and people that included something supernatural in a uh, in an account of enemy movement. And we asked him what to do about things like that and how to move those things around. And he said this, I absolutely love it. He said, I'm as skeptical of the person who is sure Bigfoot does exist as I am the person who is sure that he doesn't.
Yeah.
And I love that. You know, if anybody that says that they know for sure one way or the other uh, on these issues, those are the people that he ruled out as being helpful to him.
Wow. That's really
I love
cool.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense because if you're so sure either way, then you're not listening either way, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the way it makes sense to me. Is like if I'm so sure that yeah, Bigfoot exists, and then you're also discounting somebody's experience, like that person that you had to get information from.
Yeah.
And probably for them, I mean, I know you probably don't want to speak into that situation, but like, what they experience, that might be a really big part of their daily life in that area.
I think people talk about that a lot with Afghanistan and hearing those reports. This
Yeah.
was a different area and it was historical. Um, it's still used for training, so this had more to do with ghosts. But I do think
Oh,
it
okay.
it's the idea that you shouldn't that person's going to come to you with a story. You can't throw all of it out. You have to be able to siphon through it and take what you need. But if you're ruling those people out, uh, you're doing yourself a disservice by ruling something out. And there have been there have been times where people have used, and this is very common for for people to kind of absorb lore. You see a lot of military units do it now and stuff where they kind of where they're picking unit names and things like that, and they'll pick something that's supernatural, something that's paranormal, something that's legendary,
Hmm.
and they basically unit name their culture, their symbols in that organization off of something paranormal, and so we're mixing it in anyway into the kind of culture, but we aren't really ready to accept it as anything else. And I mean, I think what you see is it's so pervasive that where you really see the issues are when somebody has a surefire and they know without a doubt this is truth. I will say that for me personally, I like to take that approach to everything that I'm not going to rule anything out,
Yeah.
but I do like to with my personal life, I take that approach as well. But I fall back on the fact that I'm going to keep a constant truth in my life, and that is God's word and the gospel. So even though I'm open to all possibilities for things, I do like to make sure it's filtered through that truth of the gospel. And that's one of the things that I do differ on that. I do allow one constant truth for my life personally when I'm doing things, um, but I think it's the best method so far is to not emphatically know something for sure.
I agree. And I just love, I mean, I love the idea of just keeping it the mystery. Sometimes we're just not supposed to know everything. And I'm completely okay with that
Yeah.
because we live in a culture now where we have I mean, my pastors talk about this constantly from the stage where it's just like, we live in such an over inundated culture of information. We have information at our fingertips, the answers to everything, and we're no really better.
Yeah.
Mentally, we're totally not better. Like, I just don't think that we're supposed to have the capacity to filter all of this stuff, the content and all of the stuff that we see on a daily basis. I think a lot of it is distraction too.
I mean, how often in the Bible do men sin against God? Especially in large groups for knowledge. I mean,
Hmm.
that's one of the things that we do a lot. We're willing to sacrifice our relationship with God to understand more.
Hmm.
I think that's I think individually people do that too. I think this desire to know more and to know everything is it easily can lead to sin.
Yeah. And I always try to like, and especially in my own walk too, like if people are having encounters and stuff, I think sometimes we can even get wrapped up in that too, in
Hmm.
the spooky or, whatever the encounter was. And then you're just kind of trying to figure out what it was. And it's like, it reminds me of like the burning bush. Like you could sit, what if Moses just sat there and tried to figure out why God was talking through like, why this bush? Why, like if he was trying to, instead of experiencing the supernatural for what it was in that moment and just listening to God, what if you just got stuck on the actual practicality of it,
Yeah.
of like how he came through. I think sometimes that happens with the supernatural for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I think it's I think sometimes I've heard people say that it'd be easier to believe if we saw more miracles today, but I think if we saw more miracles today, we'd have a rational explanation for every miracle we saw.
Yeah. And I mean, there are so many. I think we also just kind of get blind to the miracles too. Like, I mean, I tell my son, like, we went to the zoo the other day and it was just like, dude, look at every animal here and how creative God is with
Hmm.
all of this. There's no way that this just came from, you know, a blob or an accident or, whatever. Like, the miracle is in like the everyday that he gives us. And I think we overlook a lot of that.
Yeah.
Um, Again, just because I'm kind of on this kick of like, all right, I'm observing modernity and where we are in time for what it is. And then like I was talking to my husband last night, like eventually I feel like I'm just gonna have to be like, all right, this is where we are. Now let's keep our hand on the plow for whatever's coming next, because I just personally think it's just gonna get weirder and weirder. Like I think we're in that season. I don't want to say, I know like back in the day, everybody was probably like excited, not excited, but wanting to talk about end times the way that we're talking about supernatural things in the Bible. I think that's kind of how it used to be. So I don't really get into like end times prophecy, but I kind of am just like, feels like we're in that season a little bit, you know?
Yeah. I definitely think we can see what looks like prophecy being fulfilled more.
Yeah.
And especially and maybe that was happening all over the world, and we just are having access to seeing what's going on in the world more with smartphones and things like that. But
Oh, yeah.
it it definitely looks like it.
Yeah. Now so I said in the beginning, like you are from like, you said North Carolina, like Appalachia, and where the Hatfield and McCoys are. That's funny because my pastor, his family is from like where the fighting was, I think, in
Yeah,
West Virginia. Yeah. That story, I don't know why it's so like, it's just like classic American. Just like, that story of
yeah.
the Hatfield and McCoys. Like, I remember learning about it in 5th grade and being like, man, people in the olden times were crazy.
Yeah, we never. I remember hearing about it quickly when I was a kid,
Hmm.
and our pastor was from there. I remember hearing about it quickly that he was from the Hatfield McCoy, that he was descended from the Hatfield McCoy fight. And I heard him talk about it one time. And I never thought about it again. People knew about it in the area. And I never thought about it again until I got to Alaska. Um,
Hmm.
and I was hanging out with a friend, and we were actually having a Bible study, and he had a he had a neighbor that was always very intoxicated that would stumble over, and we never kicked him out or anything. We'd always let him hang out when he came over, and hadn't thought about the Hatfields and McCoys in a while, and he stumbled over and said, "Oh, you're from this area? Which side of the Hatfield McCoy fight are you on?" And I was like, "My pastor was a Hatfield, so I guess I'm on that side." And he was like, "I'm a McCoy fan, so we'll never." And from then
Oh
on,
my gosh.
he was so obsessed with it. Every time I saw him, he'd bring it up and say, "We might have to kill each other one day. Have you ever thought about that? If this heats up again."
You're like, no, probably not.
Yeah, probably not. But
I'd
yeah,
rather not do that.
yeah.
Man, I never even thought about that. Like, people probably do like pick sides and just continue the fight. I
Uh,
have no hat in the game, so or
yeah.
skin in the game. Yeah, I don't know.
Other than knowing one of them years later, I guess that's as little allegiance as I have.
Right.
But it is, that part of the world does have our earliest history in it, and so it's interesting on that side of the country where you have you really can kind of touch our recent history pretty easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Did you there's so many people in this space that are from like those parts of the country. Did you have like any encounters while you were there?
so I've never seen anything supernatural. I've never seen any cryptids or anything like that. What I have seen, I have uh three encounters that where I've been run off from something that seemed like it was adjacent. I've had
Mm.
two in the Appalachian Mountains. One on the Kentucky side, where Kentucky is known for its caves and everything like that. And we found a cave that we wanted to check out when I was working on Fort Knox. We did some research. We wanted to see a cave, and we found one that was close enough to us. And it was known as the uh, entrance to hell. The local legend was that woman had been burned alive in a bar, and she by these three individuals, and the
Gosh.
three individuals, as they were escaping the bar, they saw her inside. She cursed them and asked that hell swallow them up. And outside the bar now there are well covers over three cave entrances. And the idea was that people say that the caves opened up and swallowed the people who had started the fire. While we were there exploring that, we had a man in an SUV who said he had come from a couple hours away to make sure that we wouldn't go in the wells. And we
Oh
were
wow.
trying things. So we were tying ropes and cameras up and things like that, and lowering them down to see how to get in. And we found a cave entrance close by that we were able to go in. Once we went in, he kind of stopped following us, and we were able to go in and explore this kind of long tunnel cave that went back and almost ended at a crack where these two rocks had uh, kind of closed in. And we thought we'd be able to get into the caves that way, but he stayed until we left the wells alone. And then whenever we go back towards the well covers, he would kind of pop back out in his SUV, come over and make sure that we weren't going in. He would take ropes and stuff like that. So had that happen. The one that stood out to me the most, and this was so then I went to college at Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina, uh, and we would hear stories. Went to church there and knew a lot of local people, and it was kind of this, these spooky things that people talk about where they'd run into rituals. People would talk about uh, walking through the woods and seeing people stop them uh, to force them away from rituals and things like that. And there was these things that the locals swore that people practiced witchcraft, and it was very common, and there was nothing you could do about it. It was just part of living up there that you would eventually see something like this.
Hmm.
Uh, at the time, I was in a commissioning program for the Army, and was just training all the time, working physical fitness. And one of the things that we had a buddy and I had read about was this decision making practice for agility, where an individual in the special operations community wrote an article about running in these tight, quick turn areas where he would have to make decisions quick.
Hmm.
And there was a waterfall near us that kind of sloped for maybe a mile. And it was more of a rolling waterfall that just kind of angled down over about a mile period, but there were boulders all over it, and we thought we could go one night when it was very bright, and we'd be able to see far enough ahead of us that we'd be able to see maybe the boulder ahead of us or something like that. And we would practice running and seeing what we thought about trying the decision making technique and incorporating that into working out. So we pick a night where there's a really bright full moon and it's clear and we'll be able to see. And I never traveled anywhere without at least one gun at the time, and I had one gun in a bag, in a backpack that I planned on carrying on the trip, and then I had another gun I would carry in the vehicle. Uh, and the way that North Carolina laws worked, I don't know how they work now, but at the time, open carry was fine. So I would just leave
Mhm.
the pistol in the front seat when I was traveling. But I didn't want to leave the pistol in the front seat when we got to this location. So a buddy and I get there. It's dark. I don't want to leave a pistol in the front seat as we're walking on this trail. So I grab both guns in my backpack, and I plan on just shoving them in the backpack as we're walking down the trail. So I've got both handguns with me, and as we start the trail, it's dark. Somebody steps onto the trail in front of us. We hadn't seen him, and they step from behind a rock right in front of us. And as they step in front of us, they ask us what we're doing out there at night uh, while we're walking on the trail that we're on. And they start approaching us. At the time they start approaching us, two people walk from behind us and come out from behind us. So obviously, all three people had been there. Um,
Hmm.
and what happened was I had the backpack and the two handguns. So as he starts approaching, my first thought is just drop the handgun or drop the backpack.
Hmm.
So when that happens, he's stepping forward, and I think he looks down, and he sees me with both handguns. It probably looked like at the time, not that I was putting them in, but that I was pulling them out. So my thought, looking back, is that he probably thought I saw him step out, and then I pulled two handguns from the bag, and
Mhm.
not the other way around. But that made him stop, and uh, I turned to look at the other two guys. My guess is that they saw the handguns as well, and at that point, I wasn't going to put him down. So he then stops moving towards us and asks what we're doing. Uh, and I say, hey, we're just all we want to do is go practice running at the waterfall. We're trying to work on some stuff on some physical fitness techniques. We're both in the military, and this just looks like a good training opportunity for us. And he says, well, here's what I want you to know. We're having a birthday party tonight at the top of the hill or at the top of the waterfall, near near a crack in the cliff. At the top of this waterfall, what looked like a massive boulder had been split in half, and there was a crack that you could walk through on one side of the waterfall and pop out at the top. But you had to walk through this crack with these along this cliff face. You couldn't see what was in the crack from anywhere except the top of the waterfall. So he told us about that, and he said, I said, that's not a problem. We're not planning on exploring. We're just going to be on the rocks. And he said, well, I don't want you to think anything weird's going on. It's a birthday party for my 13-year-old. Uh, but, we're just letting some kids kind of blow off steam. So you're going to hear, we got drums up there. You're going we've got a bonfire going on. And there's some people with torches and stuff like that. Kids playing around. You'll probably hear screaming and things like that. So it's not a big deal. It's just a birthday party. But don't go to the top. And I said, it's an open trail. We're gonna kind of follow this training plan we set out, and we'll see where that takes us. But we're not gonna bother a birthday party or anything. So as we get there, we walk a little farther. We get to the top, and I stay until these individuals kind of step back off the trail. So we don't go any farther forward until they step back off the trail, and
Mhm.
I'm able to go forward a little bit more. So now we don't put both guns in the backpack, and I keep one on me uh, while we're moving through the woods and stuff like that. And I keep the other in a backpack. We get to the waterfall and we start practicing first at the bottom, and we'd go up maybe a quarter of the way, run down, go up halfway, run down, and then we decide, we kind of feel more comfortable with it. We're going to go all the way to the top, and we're going to start running that way. Not where these guys are, but just the top of the waterfall. And as we start getting close to this crack, individuals with torches start coming out of the crack and chasing us. So anytime we get near the top, they'll chase us away from the cliff edge, and we run down part of the train. And then we run back up. We walk back up and we run back down. And we do that over and over. And as we do that, they start chasing us. And eventually, they start chasing us further and further down. And the people with torches start blocking the top of the waterfall entirely. So they won't let us get up anywhere near the top at this point. And they're running back and forth. So along the top, they're running side to side at the top of the
Wow.
waterfall. we go back and forth. We keep running up and down. We just decided to not go that far. But every time we go up now, they're a little bit further down. And the fire inside the cliff, we can see the light coming out from it. It's getting brighter and brighter. And sure enough, we're hearing drums, we hear screams, everything like that. And eventually we finish the training plan and we leave and we talk about it quite a bit. And we're not sure what's going on, but we don't think about it till the next day. The next day, I grab another buddy and I say, gotta really, I want to know what's going on back there. So we go up, no one's there, parking lot for the trailhead's empty. We get up to the top of the waterfall and we walk in, and along the cliff wall, there are burnt crosses that
Oh
people
my
have
gosh.
burnt most of and then left the remaining crosses up against the cliff. Uh, so we checked it out. We didn't have a phone at the time, no way to take, or phone with a camera. Didn't have any way to take photos or anything like that. They would have been probably too blurry to really get detail off of anyway. But we we kind of just noted that, went back and asked some people about it, and that's when a lot of the people would tell us their stories of running into similar things in the woods up there and seeing people chase them off with all kinds of ways. But yeah, that was it.
That's crazy. So I have a question. So how much, like, mile wise? So because when I'm trying to picture it, like you're on this trail and then you're getting to this waterfall. How far do you think, like mile wise, it would have been from where you kind of where they confronted you, I guess, and then to the waterfall area?
So they were right near the parking lot. So we left the parking lot. We're maybe 50 yards in the woods whenever they first confronted us. And then we went maybe another 3/4 of a mile to the base of the waterfall and then start hiking. All in all, running, we probably up and down the waterfall, we probably did close to 6, 7 miles of running the night up and down the
Yeah.
waterfall.
Okay. So from where the parking lot was, it's not like super. It's not like they're tucked into the wilderness somewhere, doing a secret society ritual. Like it's
No,
pretty.
but oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, is it like a pretty like known kind of like open area? I mean,
Yeah, at the time it was. I think it's a good time to be out there because nobody was going to be out there at night. So I don't think
okay,
anybody was worried about that. Um, but there were a lot of things there. Like I don't know if you've heard of Heavenly Mountain in the area, but it was a New Age retreat
yeah,
in the area, and that was very close by. And this was near a near a better community at the time. Um, but I don't think anybody necessarily thought that just because it was near a community meant that it was off limits or anything like that. And you do see a lot of fires, a lot of personal fires and stuff like that. You do see a lot of bonfires out there, and you do see too a lot of you see a lot of hikers and things like that. I just don't think you see anybody there at night. But I don't think that would have stood out to anybody else. College town in the mountains.
gotcha.
Yeah,
I mean, definitely that guy. That's just the weirdest. Like, oh hey, it's nothing to see here. Just my 13-year-old's birthday party by moonlight.
yeah.
Lots of bonfire. Like what?
What
That's just
13-year-old
really,
doesn't want screaming burnt crosses
of
in the?
course.
Yeah,
Happy birthday,
yeah.
son. Like that's just I don't know. That to me, that's probably just where my mind goes, but I would have been like, "Oh, okay. Have fun at your satanic ritual." Obviously. That's what you're doing. Like,
Yeah, at the time, we a lot of people up there, especially as you got farther away from the college campus, so we're odd. Uh, so I didn't think anything about it until the next day when we found the crosses and everything like that.
yeah.
So we had that, and then the only other thing that happened to us, and again, this was a chasing story that I never have seen anything, but when I was stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia, I went hiking by myself for a day, and I ended up at a place called Rude Creek. Um, and when I was checking out, I had heard that there were Bigfoot stories there, and that there were some Native American burial grounds and things like that, and burial sites. And I didn't think a thing of it because just local lore and stuff like that. But I go and I hike around the area a little bit, and I did see that there were a lot of people warning you not to go on one side. Hey, this section of woods is closed off. There's a red gate there. You just
Mhm.
can't go past that, or you'll disturb an archaeological site. So I didn't go that way. Instead, I hiked around the other way. It's on a lake, so I just hiked around the lake for a little bit. I tried fishing for a little bit, um, and really nothing else. And then I get back to kind of where I park, which is near that gate that you're not supposed to go past. And an older guy, maybe mid 70s, walks out of the woods. Um, he has this carved wooden walking stick, and he sits down with me and starts talking to me about the Native Americans that are buried in the area. He starts talking to me about Bigfoot and how Bigfoot is there to protect those individuals that are buried there. How he doesn't let anybody pass, but the government wants to dig those people up, and that Bigfoot's there to keep the government away, and all these things. And at the time, I think this person's absolutely crazy. There's I don't know what he's really saying or anything like that. But I'm letting him talk. I don't want to be rude. And while he's talking to me, he shows me his walking stick and he says, "I cut these near here. Uh, they only grow in this one certain area. They don't grow anywhere else." And he starts showing me. He says it's really strong. It's really light. I keep it in case I run into Bigfoot. And he's carved it. He's put a waterproof coating over it. He's wrapped a leather handle around it. And he said, when you're here, it's good to have ways to keep Bigfoot, let Bigfoot know you're on the sides, let him know you're not going to mess anything up. And out of nowhere, while he's telling me this, two black SUVs, I think Chevy, but it could have been a Chevy or a GMC, come ripping through this area straight towards us. And this old guy, hands me a stick and he says, "Take this in case you need it," and he runs off as fast as you can imagine for a 70-some-year-old man into the woods past that red gate. And the black SUVs pull up right to the gate. He runs off into the woods, and they sit
What?
there and watch him until he runs off. And then no one gets out of the vehicles. They just speed up, chase him off into the woods, into that spot that you weren't supposed to go, and then stay there for a few minutes. Nobody gets out of the vehicle. Nobody does anything, and then after a few minutes, windows are tinted. I can't see how many people are inside or anything like that. After a few minutes, they leave, uh, and just sitting there holding his walking stick. Still have it to this day.
Do
And
you really?
yeah, oh yeah,
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's like so I actually just released today an episode about hermits. I did with Timothy Renner, just did this really great book about hermits and their stories. And that guy sounds like totally like some sort of like woodland wizard that just had all of this knowledge for you. Oh my gosh, where is that man? The poor
Yeah,
man.
I don't know. I went back and saw him, tried to look up reviews to see if anybody else has seen him there or other people's stories. Um, and didn't really think about it until with our knife business. One of the things that we do is try to come up with fun, unique batches, and we started doing cryptid hunter batches, and we'd have
Mhm.
Bigfoot themed knives and Wendigo themed knives and stuff like that. And then what we did on this last batch was we took the sheaths and we put NFC chips in them that
Mhm.
automatically take you to reporting websites. So if you want to report a Wendigo encounter, you just tap your phone to the knife case and it brings up a website about how you can report. So all the knives
That's
have that.
awesome.
And when I was trying to think of fun ways to do that, I found that stick again. And we started incorporating that story into, how do you report a weird encounter?
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man. You have to connect them to my website because that's like so like I'm so bad at it, but like right now the way that it's set up is like any type of encounter. Because when I was doing research, I was like, there's all kinds of different places to report, but not one central place to report
Yeah.
everything. So that's kind of why we built it. But it's been slow growing because I really just don't have the time to sit and go through other encounters. But I'm hoping that people will report them to us and then we can put them on the website.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely be in touch. We've got another batch coming out right before summer.
That is such a cool idea.
So what? Yeah.
Wow.
So what we did with this one, we thought about and there's obviously some gimmicks with the marketing and the sales and stuff like that, but um we sent out some things that I would think. So I was on the infantry side in the army. I went from um standard infantry in a striker unit to the scout sniper platoon leader. At the time, there was a big focus on kind of restoring some of those technical scouting skills that people had left, which included, like how do you identify technical ground information, elevation, things like that, incline of hills, size of objects, and stuff like that. So I took some of that stuff and incorporated into that knife batch where every big knife came with a smaller knife that had a scale on the sheath, so you could put it in photos if you're taking. You put the smaller knife in photos, so you get a scale if you needed. They had specimen collection bags in the
Oh,
belt loops,
cool.
and then the NFC chips and all of that, so you could report instantly when you were seeing some of that stuff.
That is such a good idea because I feel like obviously, yeah, we're so kind of far away from that, survival. And at least I am, and like you don't think about that stuff unless you're really actively involved in that lifestyle.
Hmm.
But for a novel person to want to learn, it's probably harder for them to like go to a class or, but to have it already kind of like packaged in the marketing is really a smart idea.
Well, we're trying to make it something that's functional. So we do this with a lot of stuff. Where one of the things I loved about going to App State, especially commissioning through there, was it was a very hippie school that
Mhm.
still had a very diverse subject. So there was a semester where I had Old Testament, Chinese medicine, and counterterrorism as back-to-back classes,
That's awesome.
and it was incredible. But we took a lot from it, and we try to do that with a lot of the knives and stuff too. It's not just so like we have what's really big is our forging knives. I love
Mhm.
forging. I have ever since I've taken Chinese medicine and started using more of the edible medicinal properties and learning how we can kind of connect with plants a little bit better. And now uh, we have kids that we homeschool, and we're trying to teach about the woods. So we
Yeah,
used a lot of this to a lot of the knowledge built up over that, and a lot of our knives now to see how we would teach our kids to interact with the woods.
that's
And
awesome.
yeah, so we build that into our knives. Like right now, we're doing, and this is, I think, if anybody's listening and wants to get their kids to learn everything about outside, our kids love fairies, and the
Yeah,
idea of fairies. With our oldest kids are twin girls, so what we do every year is we put out fairy traps. And the way that fairy traps work, the kids make them. They paint them to look like mushrooms, and we put a little snare on them so they can kind of see what a trap looks like. But we let them decide where to pick them in the woods or where to place them in the woods to catch fairies. And we'll tell them, like fairies don't like poisonous plants. They love plants that you can eat. They want to be out away from game trails so a moose doesn't step on them or anything like that. And then nothing big. So in that, you teach, to find the perfect spot. You're teaching them a little bit about trapping, a little bit about edible medicinal plants, poisonous plants, and then how to identify game trails and do some tracking and stuff like that. And then when we find tracks you can't identify using things for scale and stuff like that. So we kind of use the folklore and cryptid creatures and everything like that to teach them all about nature they're going to interact with anyway. And that's been
that's
a
such a
blast
smart
for.
idea. That's the kind of stuff that, like, I don't know. We tried homeschooling during COVID for like 3 seconds. And then my son, I was like, I'm as much as I love all of this and the aesthetic of all of it, I just, this is not God's best for me. And we're going to end up murdering each other. Because my son cannot take direction. I'm mom and we just both have the same kind of, I guess, personality. So but other than like outside of school, I'm always looking for cool ideas of like how to get him more involved in the woods outside of hiking, and things like that. So you guys seem to have had a really good experience putting all that together. That's just so smart.
I think for us, one of the things that we looked at, so we were very intentional with our kids with the way that we talk about the gospel and the stories
Mhm.
of the Bible, and we try to incorporate something in everyday life. Uh, if we're outside, we'll talk about how God made everything unique and different. We just went over the creation story, again with them yesterday before bedtime. And we're very intentional with that. But one of the things that we try and do that I think we've had very good success with is whatever they're interested in, we find a way to incorporate the skills that we think are necessary for them, like just on hikes and stuff like that, into what they're interested in. So when fairies became popular with them, that became kind of the avenue that we use for everything.
Good.
And now that my son is into Bigfoot and stuff like that, and he's into all these things, he he really likes the idea of carrying something to fight Bigfoot if needed. So um,
Okay.
we
Oh,
we're getting ready to do one of our next projects, and we're finishing up right now for our knife businesses, tools of judges. So we're going through the book of Judges and coming up with weapons and tools he used, and we're recreating some of those. So we have these simulated jawbones. So we're gonna have real jawbones like Samson used, and then we're gonna have simulated jawbones and stuff like that. And he's taking a lot of those jawbone clubs that we're taking into the woods right now, and he's practicing throwing them and stuff like that, and getting ready in
that's so
case he needs to
cool.
fight Bigfoot. Uh,
Nice.
yeah.
That's awesome. All right, I need to work on getting my son off of Fortnite and into Bigfoot. You'd think with a mother that has like a Sasquatch podcast, you'd be like, "Tell me more," and he's just like, "Nah, whatever."
I think one of the things that helps us here more so, I think with our young kids, is that it's very easy with all this open wilderness. So
Right.
when we have periods where there's snow for 4 or 5 months of the year, and tracks sit around for a while and they deteriorate. So um, it's easy, and it's easy to get 'em into the mystic side of it, or not the mystic side, but more of the supernatural side, more of the uh, I guess more of the playful side about being outdoors, more of the fun, imaginative side. And
Yeah.
like I mentioned, where we live, we're very fortunate that we've got northern lights all the time, so or a lot of time we can point the kids to volcanoes near us, people that report all kinds of weird things. Um, and we had this past year some in a place we tried wild ice skating where the girls were ice skating along creeks and stuff near here, and we
Oh,
found
cool.
deteriorated rabbit tracks that look like Bigfoot tracks, and we posted those to Instagram a lot. That rabbits laying with all four paws in one spot, and as those would deteriorate, they look like one long footprint. So we'd find these prints everywhere and get the
Yeah,
kids all excited about them. So that's been the approach we take a lot.
that's so awesome. Sam, this has been such a great conversation.
Yeah,
I
I've had
really,
fun.
I really enjoyed you coming on, and it's really funny because I was like, man, Easter's coming up, and I don't have anyone to talk about. Like, I didn't plan an Easter episode, so I think this might be our Easter episode. So,
Well, that sounds great. I'm glad I could be here for it.
yeah, definitely. So why don't you tell people how they can find you, the best way to get in touch with you and see all the knives and all that stuff?
So this is something we do part time. We're limiting ourselves to one platform right now that we're focused on, and mostly. But we are at Polite but Dangerous Tools on Instagram. That's polite period but period dangerous period tools. Um, And if somebody wants to check it out, that's awesome. Come by, kind of see the aesthetic and everything like that. Feel free to follow. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about anything. And then we try to do, if you're new to customize or if you want to get into it, the easiest way you can do it is jump in on some of our giveaways. We give away a significant amount of products throughout the year compared to other shops. So right now, we have some going on. If you're interested in kind of the forging knives and stuff like that, you can jump in. But whenever this drops, we'll probably have another one going on as well. And for Easter, we'll probably have some cool biblical themed things going on at the same time. So feel free to check us out on Instagram. That's the easiest way.
Awesome. Well, I definitely would love to have you come back on at some point, and we'll definitely stay in touch for sure.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it already.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. And remember, the truth is out there. God is with you, and everyone always ends up in the kitchen.
You have been listening to Sasquatch and Sourdough. I'm Christina, and thank you so much for tuning in. Sasquatch and Sourdough is so much more than just a podcast. We're a community of kindred spirits, united by our curiosity and fascination with the extraordinary. And we want to bring you into the conversation. So whether you've had a brush with the unexplainable, seen something that you can't quite wrap your head around, this is your space. We invite you to join us as we break bread and break down the barriers between the known and the unknown. If you want to share your story, you can email us at sasquatchandsourdough@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram. Until next time, remember, the truth is out there, God is with you, and everyone always ends up in the kitchen.